November 24, 1944. Easley Field, Saipan, Mariana Islands. Lieutenant Colonel Robert K. Morgan advanced the throttles of his B-29 Superfortress Dauntless Doty, leading 110 aircraft of the 73rd Bomb Wing toward Tokyo. The instruments before him relayed a narrative the Japanese High Command could hardly accept. The turbo-supercharger pressure gauges rose steadily, sustaining sea-level power at altitudes where enemy fighters struggled for oxygen. Today, these silver leviathans would exhibit a technological superiority Japan could not counter. Hidden within each engine, NL housed twin General Electric turbo-superchargers, devices more decisive than any cannon or bomb. These systems, using exhaust gases to compress incoming air, enabled the massive Ryder 3350 engines to maintain 2,200 horsepower at elevations approaching 32,000 feet. Japanese fighters optimized for medium altitudes faltered in reaching these heights. Their engines, lacking efficient high-altitude supercharging, lost power sharply in thin air. This marked the first B-29 mission on Tokyo, launched from the newly seized Marianas bases, only 1,500 miles from Japan's capital. Unlike earlier sorties from remote China, these bombers could strike consistently and return safely. Pressurized cabins allowed crews to breathe normally, while Japanese interceptors struggled with rudimentary oxygen systems prone to failure at extreme altitudes. As Morgan's bomber climbed into the dawn sky, trailed by over 100 others, the technological gap between American and Japanese aviation became unmistakable. 5 months prior, on June 15, 1944, the first strategic B-29 bombing raid against Japan had departed Chengdu, China. 75 Superfortresses lifted off that evening, though only 47 reached the main target at Yada on Kyushu. The mission revealed both the B-29's promise and the challenges ahead. 7 aircraft were lost, 1 shot down over the target, 1 destroyed during an emergency landing, and 5 in operational mishaps. 57 airmen perished. Even so, the operation demonstrated that Japanese defenses were insufficient against high-altitude bombers. Radar operators on Kyushu detected the approaching formations. Air raid sirens shrieked across Yada. Pilots of the Imperial Army's 4th Sentai scrambled to their Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu twin-engine fighters, climbing aggressively toward bombers flying between 8,000 and 21,000 feet. Even at these relatively modest altitudes dictated by fuel limitations, Japanese interceptors struggled. Their Nakajima Ha-25 engines, rated at 1,080 horsepower each, lacked effective turbocharging. Above 20,000 feet, their engines delivered perhaps 60% of rated power. Warrant Officer Sadamitsu Kimura managed to engage one B-29, the aircraft designated Limber Dragon, carrying 12 crew members. His attack succeeded, sending the Superfortress down in flames with no survivors. But this lone triumph came at great cost. Kimura expended nearly all his ammunition and barely returned to base, his engine dangerously overheating at altitude. Around him, other Japanese pilots fired desperately at silver bombers, but most attacks failed to cause significant damage. The B-29's defensive weapons, coordinated by advanced fire control systems, responded with deadly precision. Captain Terahiko Kobayashi of the Imperial Army's 244th Sentai, one of Japan's most skilled fighter leaders, later recorded his unit's frustration. American bombers operated at elevations where Japanese aircraft barely maintained level flight, let alone maneuvered effectively. The B-29's speed at altitude, approximately 350 miles per hour, matched what Japanese fighters could achieve in thin air above 25,000 feet. Reaching bombing altitude exhausted fuel reserves, reduced ammunition capacity, and stressed engines to the point of near-catastrophic failure. The secret to American dominance lay in technology Japan had explored but never fully implemented. General Electric's turbo-supercharger Type B series for the Ryder 3350 engine exemplified engineering mastery. Each B-29 engine mounted 2 devices using hot exhaust gases to spin turbine wheels exceeding 20,000 revolutions per minute. These turbines drove centrifugal compressors, forcing air into intake manifolds at pressures equivalent to sea level, even at 30,000 feet. The principle was elegant: waste exhaust energy, normally lost, performed useful work by compressing intake air. This allowed engines to burn fuel efficiently at altitudes where unassisted engines would suffocate. Each turbocharger added roughly 150 pounds per engine but delivered performance comparable to doubling engine displacement. Without these superchargers, the B-29 would have been just another heavy bomber, vulnerable to interception and unable to exploit altitude as a defensive advantage. Japan experimented with turbocharging as early as 1941, when Nakajima engineers examined captured documents and obtained sample units through secret channels. Japanese engineers recognized the tactical advantage, yet despite 3 years of development, they never fielded operational turbocharged fighters in significant numbers. The reasons exposed the industrial divide between Japan and America. Turbochargers demanded metallurgy beyond Japanese capabilities. Turbine wheels endured exhaust temperatures over 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit while spinning at forces equivalent to thousands of pounds per square inch. Any flaw caused catastrophic failure. American manufacturers like General Electric possessed the metallurgical expertise, precision forging equipment, and quality control to produce reliable turbines. Japan's war-stretched industry could not meet these standards. Lieutenant Fumio Nia, an engineering officer who examined captured B-29 parts later in the war, documented surviving findings in Japanese archives. Studying a turbocharger removed from a crashed B-29 in China, Nia marveled at American precision. Turbine blades machined to thousandths of an inch, perfectly balanced, spinning at maximum speed without vibration. High-temperature alloys exceeded anything Japanese industry produced, and bearings designed for extreme heat while maintaining exact alignment reflected unmatched manufacturing capacity. Even more critical was the systematic American production. General Electric's Schenectady, New York, plant produced thousands monthly, each meeting precise specifications. Production lines featured automated testing, verifying performance before installation. Defective units were identified and rejected before deployment. Japanese attempts yielded perhaps dozens monthly, with reliability so poor that most failed within hours. By August 1944, Japanese intelligence compiled alarming reports on American bomber capabilities. Interrogations of captured B-29 crews, wreckage analysis, and pilot observations painted a picture of technological supremacy that stunned military leaders. The B-29 was not merely a large bomber, it was a flying weapons platform incorporating innovations Japan could not match. Colonel Takashiro Hattori, an operations officer at Imperial General Headquarters, wrote that month about the implications of B-29 raids. American bombers operated with impunity at altitudes Japanese fighters could not effectively reach. Interceptors that engaged reported that even scoring hits, the B-29's rugged construction absorbed damage that would have destroyed Japanese aircraft. Most alarming was the realization that these raids were only the beginning. American production suggested thousands of B-29s would eventually strike Japan, each beyond effective defensive reach. The mathematics of interception had turned catastrophically against Japan. A fighter climbing from sea level to 30,000 feet consumed roughly 30 minutes and burned a third of its fuel. At high altitude, performance degraded sharply. Guns, while deadly at close range, required pilots to close within a few hundred feet of targets, a maneuver made nearly impossible by reduced aircraft performance and B-29 defensive fire control systems. Even successful interceptions often cost irreplaceable. Experienced pilots who died when damaged or fuel-depleted fighters crashed attempting to return from extreme altitude. Major Makoto Ogawa, who eventually claimed 7 B-29 kills to become one of Japan's most successful superfortress hunters, later described the overwhelming disadvantage Japanese pilots faced. American bombers flew in a realm where Japanese aircraft barely functioned. Americans enjoyed pressurized cabins with heated compartments, while Japanese pilots endured temperatures 40 degrees below zero at high altitude, their fingers numb. Despite electrically heated flight suits that rarely worked properly, oxygen systems frequently malfunctioned, leaving pilots hypoxic and disoriented. Gun barrels froze, ammunition belts jammed in cold, and engines ran so rough that pilots constantly feared flameouts. Japanese aircraft designers desperately sought solutions. The Nakajima Ki-87, developed specifically as a high-altitude B-29 interceptor, incorporated a turbo-supercharged Nakajima HAR-219 engine intended to deliver effective performance above 30,000 feet on paper. The design was impressive. Service ceiling above 40,000 feet, heavy armament of 30 mm and 20 mm cannon, and speed sufficient to overtake B-29 formations. Only one prototype flew before war's end. In April 1945, demonstrating severe problems. The turbocharger, cobbled together from inadequate materials with insufficient testing, failed repeatedly. Even when functioning, it delivered inconsistent performance. The project died not from lack of engineering skill, but from lack of industrial capacity to produce reliable turbochargers. The Tachikawa Ki-94, another proposed high-altitude interceptor, never progressed beyond mock-up stage. The Mitsubishi J-8M, a rocket-powered interceptor based on the German Mi-163 Comet, offered high-altitude capability. Without turbochargers, but dangerous rocket fuel and extremely short endurance made it impractical for defending against B-29 raids. Japan's finest aeronautical engineers understood what was needed, but lacked the industrial foundation to produce it. American B-29 operations expanded relentlessly. By November 1944, 21st Bomber Command began flying missions from Marana bases on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. These islands lay only 1,500 miles from Tokyo, well within B-29 range. Robert K. Morgan's mission on November 24 sent 111 Superfortresses against the Musashino aircraft engine plant in Tokyo. Weather and Jutrine winds limited results, but the psychological impact on Japan was profound. American bombers now struck the homeland almost daily, and Japanese defenses proved increasingly ineffective. Sergeant Choi Suzuki, an anti-aircraft gunner stationed near Tokyo, kept a diary documenting growing despair among defenders. Initially, his unit engaged B-29 formations with confidence, their 75mm guns firing shells to altitudes around 25,000 feet, but American bombers often flew higher, beyond gun range, or approached at angles, giving gunners insufficient tracking time. More frustrating, even direct hits rarely brought down B-29s. The bomber's structure built with redundant systems and armored in critical areas withstood damage that would have shredded Japanese aircraft. Suzuki recorded watching crippled B-29s trailing smoke with engines shut down, continuing toward targets, and often returning safely to base. Japanese efforts to improve air defenses focused on fighter performance modifications. The Kawasaki K-61 High-End powered by a liquid-cooled HAR-40 engine could reach altitudes around 32,000 foot higher than most Japanese fighters, but climb rate was insufficient and engine reliability so poor that many Ki-61s were grounded awaiting spare parts. The Nakajima 84 Hay-8 introduced in 1944 represented Japan's best mass-produced fighter. It featured the Nakajima Hamera engine, a complex radial design delivering good performance at altitude when properly maintained. However, the Homar's intricate construction made it maintenance intensive, and quality control problems meant many engines failed prematurely. The Ki-84's theoretical performance was impressive. Maximum speed around 400 miles per hour. At 20,000 feet, service ceiling near 35,000 feet, and heavy armament of 20mm and 30mm cannon. In practice, few Ki-84s achieved these specifications. Poor quality fuel damaged engines, crude lubricants broke down at low temperatures, and manufacturing defects caused frequent failures. American pilots who test flew captured Ki-84s after the war praised handling and performance, noting it matched or exceeded American fighters in some respects, but they also observed that these captured examples had been selected for exceptional condition, maintained by skilled Japanese mechanics using hoarded high-quality materials. The average operational Ki-84 performed far below design specifications. Even when Japanese fighters reached B-29 operating altitudes, they faced the bombers' sophisticated defensive armament. Each Superfortress mounted 10 50 caliber machine guns in remote controlled turrets. A central fire control system allowed gunners to coordinate fire, concentrating multiple turrets on single targets. The system incorporated computing sites automatically calculating lead end deflection, significantly improving hit probability. Japanese pilots quickly learned that approaching within effective gun range of a B-29 formation meant flying through coordinated barrage. Few survived. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots was devastating. They had been trained to believe in Japanese aviation superiority in invincibility of Bushido, spirit over material advantage. Reality of combat against B-29s shattered these illusions. Captain Yasuhiko Koroe, a veteran fighter pilot with the 302nd Air Group, wrote in a letter discovered after the war that fighting B-29s felt like attacking a fortress. Bombers absorbed punishment that would destroy a dozen Japanese aircraft, their crews protected by armor and redundant systems, while Japanese pilots flew unarmored fighters with vulnerable fuel tanks and minimal protection. December 1944 brought the first major daylight raid against Tokyo when 86 B-29s attacked the Musashino plant. Japanese defenses managed to shoot down or damage several bombers, but at terrible cost. The 244th Sentai, led by Captain Kobayashi, claimed 6 B-29s destroyed through desperate ramming attacks, but lost multiple irreplaceable pilots in the process. Ramming became increasingly common as Japanese pilots realized conventional attacks often failed to bring down massive bombers. The tactic was suicidal. Pilots aimed fighters at B-29 wing routes or tail assemblies, hoping to destroy control surfaces, then attempted to bail out before impact. Few survived. American crews respected the fanatical courage of Japanese pilots, even as they were horrified by waste of lives. Technical Sergeant John Plouflin, a gunner on City of Los Angeles, later recounted watching a Japanese fighter deliberately ram the B-29 flying beside his. The fighter struck the bomber's tail, shearing off the entire vertical stabilizer. Both aircraft fell from formation in uncontrolled spins. Plouflin saw no parachutes. He later learned the B-29 crew, 10 men, died in the crash. The Japanese pilot's name was never known, one of thousands who died defending their homeland against an enemy they could not defeat. By early 1945, Japanese air defenses had deteriorated near collapse. Fuel shortages grounded many fighters. Experienced pilots had been killed in staggering numbers, replaced by teenagers with minimal training who stood no chance against veteran B-29 crews. American fighter escorts P-51 Mustangs flying from Uoma after its capture in March 1945 made defending against B-29 raids even more hopeless. Japanese interceptors climbing slowly to altitude became easy targets for P-51s that could outclimb, outrun, and outfight any Japanese fighter. The night of March 9 to 10, 1945, marked the worst disaster in Japanese history. General Curtis LeMay, commanding 21st Bomber Command, ordered a radical change in tactics. Instead of precision bombing from high altitude, 334 B-29s would attack Tokyo at night from altitudes around 7,000 feet, carrying incendiary bombs designed to start fires. The decision was controversial. Lower altitude exposed bombers to heavier anti-aircraft fire, but LeMay calculated correctly that Japanese night defenses were weak in lower altitude, eliminated turbocharger stress, engine overheating issues, and allowed each B-29 to carry vastly more bombs. Results exceeded LeMay's expectations. In 3 hours, American bombers dropped nearly 2,000 tons of incendiaries on Tokyo's crowded districts. Firestorms developed, creating winds that sucked oxygen from shelters and generated temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees. An estimated 100,000 people died, more than either atomic bombing would later kill. 16 square miles of the city burned to ash. Only 14 B-29s were lost, remarkably low given the raid's intensity. The Tokyo firebombing demonstrated that even without exploiting high-altitude capability, B-29s could devastate Japan. But turbo-superchargers had made the B-29 force possible. Without ability to operate at altitude, to fly above weather, to cruise beyond fighter reach, the strategic bombing campaign would have been unsustainable. Missions from China across vast distances to Kyushu required high altitude efficiency. Daylight precision raids on aircraft factories and oil refineries demanded the protection altitude provided. Even low-level firebombing raids were possible only because American air superiority had been established through earlier high-altitude operations that destroyed Japanese fighter production. Japanese engineers who examined captured B-29 components after the war expressed bitter admiration for American engineering. Turbochargers represented everything Japan's industry lacked: precision manufacturing, advanced materials, rigorous quality control, and capacity to produce thousands of complex units monthly. A single B-29 contained 8 turbochargers. American production exceeded 200 B-29s monthly by 1945, meaning 1,600 turbochargers monthly just for new aircraft, plus thousands more for replacements and maintenance. General Electric's factories produced These at rates Japan could not have achieved if devoting its entire aircraft engine industry solely to turbocharger production. The broader implications were clear to thoughtful Japanese observers. If America could produce turbochargers in such quantities, what else could it produce? The answer was evident in waves of B-29s appearing over Japan almost daily by summer 1945. In P-51s escorts that destroyed Japanese fighters with ease, in naval forces that blockaded Japan completely. In atomic bombs that fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. First Lieutenant Toshio Oti, a technical intelligence officer who survived the war, later wrote that examining captured American aviation technology induced despair among Japanese engineers. Every system, every component demonstrated manufacturing quality and engineering sophistication beyond Japanese capabilities. Turbochargers particularly impressed him because their operation was conceptually simple, yet execution required precision that Japan's war-damaged industry could no longer achieve, even had Japan somehow obtained turbocharger designs in 1941. He concluded it lacked the industrial base to produce them in useful quantities. The human cost of this technological gap was staggering. Japanese pilot training programs, once rigorous in producing superb aviators, had collapsed by 1945. Fuel shortages meant student pilots received perhaps 50 hours of flight training compared to 200 to 300 hours American pilots received. These inadequately trained pilots flew obsolescent aircraft against opponents who enjoyed every advantage. In July 1945, during a major battle over the Inland Sea, Japanese fighters attacked a formation of over 100 B-29s. American records show perhaps 2 bombers damaged, while Japanese forces lost 23 fighters destroyed with minimal damage inflicted on bombers. The B-29 campaign ultimately delivered 147,000 tons of bombs on Japanese targets, destroyed 40% of urban industrial areas in 66 cities, and killed an estimated 330,000 civilians. Japanese war production, already declining, collapsed completely by summer 1945. Transportation networks were destroyed, making it impossible to move resources even where they existed. Workers abandoned factories to flee burning cities. The government lost control of economic planning as industries dispersed into rural areas or ceased operation. Major General Arasuwa Seizo, chief of Japanese military intelligence, admitted after the war that by June 1945, his analysts recognized defeat was inevitable. American air supremacy was absolute. The B-29 campaign had destroyed Japan's ability to wage war. Yet the government, trapped by military honor codes forbidding surrender, continued fighting until atomic bombs provided justification for capitulation. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima on August 6 and Nagasaki on August 9, 1945 marked the end of World War II. Those atomic bombs were delivered by B-29s, aircraft whose ability to reach targets in Japan and return safely depended fundamentally on turbo-supercharger technology. The Enola Gay, flying at 31,000 foot over Hiroshima, operated at altitude made possible by 8 General Electric turbochargers maintaining engine power in thin air. Even at war's end, with Japanese defenses essentially non-existent, altitude capability provided by turbochargers offered protection against remaining anti-aircraft fire and allowed crews to escape atomic blast effects. Post-war interviews with Japanese fighter pilots revealed a consistent theme: admiration mixed with frustration. They respected American engineering and recognized that no amount of pilot skill could overcome technological disadvantage. Lieutenant Isamu Sasaki, who survived the war with 3 B-29 kills, one of the highest tallies achieved, later reflected that his successes came only when circumstances were perfect. Surprise attack from above with sun behind him against isolated bombers separated from formations. Against formations flying at altitude with alert crews, even the best Japanese pilots rarely succeeded. The development of high-altitude aviation capability had been pursued by many nations before World War II. Germany developed turbo-superchargers but never successfully deployed them operationally, focusing instead on mechanical superchargers, which were simpler but less efficient at extreme altitude. Britain relied primarily on sophisticated multi-stage mechanical superchargers providing good high-altitude performance without turbocharging complexity. America alone made turbo-supercharging standard equipment on heavy bombers, accepting additional complexity, cost and maintenance burden in return for unprecedented high-altitude capability. This decision reflected American industrial confidence. Turbo-superchargers required precision manufacturing, regular maintenance by skilled mechanics, and steady supply of spare parts. America possessed the infrastructure to support these requirements. Japan did not. Even if Japanese engineers had designed perfect turbochargers in 1941, the nation lacked manufacturing base to produce them in quantity, maintenance organization to keep them functioning, and supply system to provide necessary spare parts and replacement units. The post-war U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that the B-29 campaign was decisively effective in destroying Japan's capacity to wage war. While survey authors debated whether Japan would have surrendered without atomic bombs or planned invasion, they unanimously agreed that by August 1945, American air supremacy was complete and Japanese defenses were shattered. The B-29's technological advantages, particularly high-altitude capability enabled by turbo-superchargers, made this outcome inevitable once sufficient bombers became available. Japanese records captured after the war revealed the extent to which B-29 raids dominated military planning from late 1944 onward. Imperial General Headquarters devoted enormous resources to air defense, pulling fighter units from other theaters, constructing thousands of anti-aircraft positions and training tens of thousands of troops for airfield defense. All efforts proved futile against bombers operating beyond effective defensive reach. The final B-29 mission against Japan flew on August 14, 1945, the day before surrender was announced. More than 300 superfortresses attacked targets near Tokyo, encountering no opposition. Japanese fighters remained on the ground, conserving fuel for the expected American invasion that would never come. B-29 crews returned to their Murano bases, not yet knowing the war was effectively over. Their missions completed through cumulative destruction of hundreds of raids Japan could not prevent or effectively counter. In decades following the war, aviation historians and aeronautical engineers conducted extensive analyses of B-29 technological advantages. The consensus was clear. Turbo-supercharging provided a crucial capability that enabled strategic bombing of Japan from distant bases. Without this advancement, B-29s would have been restricted to missions at altitudes near 20,000 feet, well within reach of Japanese interceptors and anti-aircraft artillery. Losses under such conditions would have been catastrophic. The entire strategic framework for striking Japan from the Marianas would have been impractical. Insights Japanese engineers gained from studying American aviation technology influenced post-war industrial development in Japan. Focus on precision engineering, stringent quality control, and systematic manufacturing, hallmarks of American turbocharger production, became key elements of Japan's post-war economic recovery. Former aviation specialists transitioned into civilian industries, bringing deep expertise in advanced manufacturing techniques. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress flew its final combat mission in 1954 during the Korean War. By then, jet-powered bombers were replacing propeller-driven aircraft, and turbo-supercharging for piston engines had become largely obsolete. Yet the B-29's legacy endured. It demonstrated that technological supremacy could overcome numerical disadvantages, that industrial capacity was as critical as individual bravery, and that air power alone could cripple a nation's ability to wage war. Today, only 2 B-29s remain airworthy, preserved and maintained by dedicated organizations, allowing future generations to witness these historic planes. When these bombers perform at airshows, there are 3350 engines produced that distinctive, deep-throated roar, yet few spectators realize that hidden within each engine are turbochargers, the same technology that helped end the deadliest war in history. These components, spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute as B-29s ascend, still perform the function they were designed for 8 decades ago, compressing air to maintain engine output in thin atmosphere. The story of Japanese forces confronting B-29 Superfortresses highlights how industrial capacity and technological innovation shaped modern warfare. It was the turbochargers enabling flight at 30,000 feet, the industrial system producing thousands of intricate components, the training programs preparing crews to use them efficiently, and the logistical network maintaining them. These were the true weapons of the strategic bombing campaign. Technological superiority alone did not guarantee American victories at the outset of the war. However, once U.S. industry mobilized, B-29 production reached full scale, and Marianas bases became operational, defeat for Japan became inevitable. No degree of pilot skill or sacrifice could counter the material and technological advantages embodied in these silver bombers soaring at altitudes where Japanese fighters struggled to breathe. As B-29s cruised 30,000 feet above Japan, their turbochargers spinning silently within the engines to maintain sea-level power in stratospheric air, they carried more than bombs. They carried proof that industrial might had become the decisive factor in modern warfare, and that America possessed that might in quantities no adversary could match. Japan had not anticipated this reality. Once the silver bombers filled the skies over the home islands, operating beyond the reach of any defenses, there was nothing the Japanese could do to stop them.